Ever wonder what the universe sounds like when it wants to have a conversation? Turns out, it sounds exactly like 3 polite knocks on your apartment door at 2:07 a.m. Not the desperate pounding of someone locked out in the rain. Not the timid tapping of a pizza delivery guy who's lost and running late. No, this was the sound of infinity clearing its throat and asking if you had a minute to chat about the meaning of existence. While you're sitting there in your underwear, of course, because apparently cosmic revelations don't wait for you to put on pants. Now, here's where most people would grab a baseball bat or pretend they're not home. But what if I told you that opening that door would shatter everything you thought you knew about existence, consciousness, and why we're all just floating on a rock in an infinite void, desperately try to find meaning in our morning coffee? See, we spend our entire lives asking the big questions. Why are we here? What's our purpose? Is there intelligent life out there? And then we go right back to arguing about whether pineapple belongs on pizza or which celebrity is dating whom. We're cosmic beings having human experiences, yet we act like cosmic toddlers having temper tantrums. But what happens when the universe decides to answer back? When the very questions that keep you awake at 3 a.m. suddenly show up at your front door, literally knocking? Do you have the courage to face the answers? Or do you hide behind the couch like you're avoiding student loan collectors? I'm about to tell you what happened tonight. I chose to open that door. Fair warning though, this story might leave you staring at the ceiling tonight, questioning whether that sound outside your window is just the wind or something else entirely. And if you make it to the end without having at least one existential crisis, well, you might want to check if you still have a pulse. The thing is, we're all just one knock away from discovering that our comfortable little reality is about as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. So buckle up, because we're about to explore what happens when the infinite cosmos decides to have a conversation with your finite mind. And trust me, it's going to get weird. Let me set the scene properly. It was Tuesday, because of course it was Tuesday. Nothing cosmically significant ever happens on a Tuesday. Tuesdays are for leftover pizza, existential dread, and wondering if you peaked in high school. I was doing all 3 simultaneously when the knock happened. I've been having one of those nights where Netflix felt too overwhelming, sleep felt impossible, and every thought spiraled into what am I doing with my life? You know the type. The kind where you start Googling things like, is it normal to feel like an alien in your own species? And then immediately question why you're asking the internet for validation about your alienation. The irony wasn't lost on me later. My apartment was in that perfect state of organized chaos that screams functional adult pretending to have their life together. Dirty dishes in the sink forming their own ecosystem. Books I'd bought to seem intellectual gathering dust. And that pile of laundry on the chair that had basically become furniture at this point. Then came the knock. 3 precise raps. Not the desperate hammering of someone locked out. Not the timid tapping of an uncertain visitor. Just purposeful. Like whoever was outside knew exactly what they were doing and had all the time in the universe to do it. I paused my existential crisis mid-thought and stared at the door. Who knocks at 2:07 a.m.? Pizza delivery guys ring the buzzer downstairs. Drunk friends call first. Serial killers probably don't knock politely, right? The logical part of my brain, that tiny voice that gets shouted down by anxiety and overthinking, suggested I look through the peephole. So I did. And here's where things get interesting in that this is them having a breakdown way. The peephole showed nothing. Well, not nothing. It showed the hallway, the flickering fluorescent light that the landlord had been meaning to fix for 6 months, the ugly carpet that looked like it was designed by someone who had never actually seen colors before. But no person. Maybe they left. Maybe it was just the building settling. Maybe I was finally losing it in hallucinating knocks now. But then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. Same rhythm, same precision, same inexplicable certainty that someone, or something, was definitely out there. This time, I noticed something else. The knocks seemed to resonate not just through the door, but through me. Like they were vibrating at the exact frequency of my uncertainty. Now, I should mention that I'm the kind of person who reads too much science fiction and watches too many documentaries about the universe. I know that statistically speaking, we're probably not alone out here. I know that our galaxy contains billions of stars, and our observable universe contains billions of galaxies. I know that the likelihood of Earth being the only planet to develop intelligent life is roughly equivalent to winning the lottery while being struck by lightning during a solar eclipse. But knowing something intellectually and having it knock on your door at 2 a.m. are two very different things. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably 30 seconds, engaging in that very human behavior of trying to logic my way out of the impossible. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone was crouched below the peephole. Maybe I should just ignore it and hope it goes away, like I do with most of life's uncomfortable situations. But here's the thing about being human. We're curious creatures. Even when curiosity killed the cat, skinned it, and left it on our doorstep as a warning. We can't help ourselves. We see a do not push button, and suddenly that's the only button we want to push. We hear don't look behind you, and we immediately crane our necks around like owls. So despite every survival instinct screaming at me to leave the door locked, despite every horror movie I'd ever seen teaching me that nothing good happens when you open doors to the unknown, despite the rational part of my brain pointing out that this was exactly how people end up on the news with the phrase, "No one could have predicted this tragedy," I reached for the doorknob. The door opened with that familiar squeak that I've been meaning to fix since I moved in 2 years ago. Some problems you live with until they become part of your identity, you know? Standing in my hallway was, calling it a being seems more appropriate than person. About my height, which is average in that aggressively unremarkable way. But that's where the similarities ended. Imagine if someone took the concept of humanoid and ran it through Google Translate about 15 times, then handed the result to an artist who had only ever heard humans described over a bad phone connection. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head where you'd expect it to be, but everything was just slightly off. Like someone had tried to recreate humanity from memory and gotten most of it right, but missed some crucial details. The skin, if you could call it skin, had this subtle iridescent quality, like oil on water. The eyes were larger than they should be, and instead of whites, there was this deep, starry blackness that seemed to contain actual depth. Looking into them was like staring into space itself, complete with the uncomfortable realization that space was staring back. But the weirdest part, it was wearing what appeared to be a very normal, very human-looking button-down shirt and khaki pants, like it had stopped at a Target on the way over and thought, when in Rome, dress like the Romans. When visiting humans, dress like, humans. We stared at each other for a moment that stretched like taffy. You know that feeling when you're in an elevator with a stranger and you both reach for the same button at the same time, and suddenly you're trapped in this bubble of social awkwardness? It was like that, but with the added layer of, one of us might not be from this planet. I said, because apparently my brain had decided that, was the appropriate response to first contact with an extraterrestrial being. Can I help you? It tilted its head in a way that was almost familiar, but not quite right, like a dog trying to understand a complex command. I apologize for the lateness of my arrival, it said, and its voice was normal. Completely, utterly, disappointingly normal. Like a customer service representative with good diction. I seem to have miscalculated your species' optimal interaction periods. My species, I repeated, because my brain was still stuck on the fact that this was actually happening. Homo sapiens, it clarified helpfully. Though I must say, your individual specimen appears to be in a state of, how do you put it, casual disarray. I looked down at myself. Underwear, old t-shirt with a questionable stain, hair that could charitably be described as post-apocalyptic. Yeah, if aliens were going to judge humanity, based on me at 2 a.m., we were in trouble. I wasn't exactly expecting, I gestured vaguely at all of it. Are you an extraterrestrial entity conducting a cultural exchange program? Yes. It said this with the same tone you might use to confirm that yes, you are indeed from accounting. Though I prefer to think of myself as a curious neighbor who happens to live approximately 47.3 light years away. The casual way it dropped that distance made my brain do a little skip. 47.3 light years. That's roughly 278 trillion miles. This being had traveled further than my mind could comprehend just a knock on my door. Meanwhile, I consider it an adventure when I try a new grocery store. Would it be terribly inconvenient if I came in? It asked politely. I've been observing your species' social protocols, And I believe the customary response to a neighborhood visit is to offer refreshments and engage in what you call small talk. Though I confess I'm uncertain why the talk needs to be small. Are there regulations on conversation size I should be aware of? And that's how I found myself inviting an alien into my apartment at 2 a.m., wondering if I had coffee that wasn't expired and whether intergalactic beings judge humans based on their housekeeping skills. "Please come in," I said, stepping aside. Though I should warn you, I'm not really prepared for any of this. I don't think there's a protocol for what you're supposed to serve extraterrestrial visitors. "Oh, don't worry about refreshments," it said, stepping carefully over the pile of shoes by my door. "I don't require sustenance in the traditional sense, though I am curious about this coffee substance I've observed humans consuming in alarming quantities. Is it a religious ritual or a form of voluntary poisoning?" I laughed. Actually laughed, despite the surreal nature of the situation. "Both, depending on the day." It nodded sagely, as if this confirmed some hypothesis about human behavior. "Fascinating. Your species seems to excel at recreational self-destruction. Very admirable, in a way," as it settled onto my couch. Carefully, like it wasn't entirely sure the furniture would support it. I had the distinct feeling that this was going to be either the most interesting conversation of my life or the last conversation of my life. Possibly both. "So," I said, settling into my chair and trying to pretend this was a normal Tuesday night. "What brings you to Earth? Tourism? Research? Alien Uber driver who took a wrong turn at Alpha Centauri?" It considered this seriously. "I suppose you could say I'm here on business, though the business in question might be more philosophical than you'd expect." "Philosophical business?" I asked, settling back into my chair. This was either going to be the most enlightening conversation of my life, or I was about to become the subject of a very weird missing person report. The being, who still hadn't offered a name, which seemed like an oversight in intergalactic etiquette, adjusted its position on my couch with the careful precision of someone still figuring out how joints work. "Yes, philosophical business. You see, I'm what you might call a researcher, though not in the way your scientists probe and catalog things. I study existential phenomena. The big questions, as you humans say. Why do conscious beings exist? What drives them? How do they find meaning in apparently meaningless circumstances?" I blinked. "So you're like a cosmic therapist?" "More of a cosmic anthropologist with a focus on existential behavior patterns." It paused, those star-filled eyes studying me with uncomfortable intensity. "And your species, I must say, is absolutely fascinating in your approach to existence." "Fascinating how?" Like, "Wow, look how advanced they are, fascinating," or "Wow, look at those idiots, fascinating." "Oh, definitely the latter," it said with what might have been amusement, but in the most endearing way possible. I wasn't sure whether to feel insulted or complimented. "Explain." The being leaned forward slightly, and I caught a glimpse of genuine excitement in those cosmic eyes. "Well, consider this. You're a species that has figured out quantum mechanics, but you still argue about whether the Earth is round. You've split the atom, but you can't agree on basic facts about your own planet's climate. You've sent messages into space hoping to contact alien civilizations, yet you can't have a civil conversation with your neighbors about where to put the garbage bins." I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it. "Fair point. But that's not even the fascinating part," it continued. "The fascinating part is how you've managed to create meaning and purpose despite being fully aware that you're temporary biological machines on a rock floating through an infinite void that doesn't care about your existence. When you put it like that, it sounds pretty depressing." "Depressing? No. It's brilliant." The being's voice took on an almost professor-like enthusiasm. "Do you realize how remarkable that is? Most conscious species, when they reach the level of cosmic awareness that humans have achieved, tend to fall into one of two categories. They either become paralyzed by the meaninglessness of existence, or they develop God complexes and start trying to control everything around them. And we're different how? You do both, simultaneously, with gusto." It gestured excitedly with arms that moved just slightly wrong, like a marionette controlled by someone still learning the strings. "You have existential crises while binge-watching television shows about people having existential crises. You write poetry about the meaninglessness of life, and then argue passionately about whether that poetry is good or not, as if aesthetic judgment could somehow matter in a universe that doesn't care about aesthetics. I felt like I was being psychoanalyzed by the cosmos itself. So we're, what? Cosmically entertaining. You're cosmically ingenious without realizing it. The being settled back, looking oddly pleased. You solved the fundamental problem of conscious existence, which is how to keep going when you know it doesn't matter. That hit me like a philosophical slap in the face. I sat there for a moment, processing. I'm not sure whether you're complimenting us or pointing out how stupid we are. Both. That's exactly what I mean. The being clapped its hands together with a sound like distant thunder. You've created this beautiful, tragic, hilarious system where you simultaneously acknowledge the absurdity of existence and refuse to let that stop you from existing anyway. You know you're going to die. You know everyone you love is going to die. You know the sun will eventually burn out and the universe will end in heat death. And your response is to invent ice cream flavors and argue about sports teams. Are you saying that's good? It's magnificent. Do you know what most species do when they reach cosmic awareness? They either despair themselves into extinction or become so detached from material existence that they stop participating in life altogether. But humans? Humans look into the abyss, shrug, and ask if anyone wants to grab pizza. I couldn't help but laugh. That does sound like us. And the humor. The being continued, now fully animated in that slightly wrong way. You've weaponized your own tragedy. You make jokes about death, about failure, about the meaninglessness of existence. You turn your darkest fears into entertainment. You created comedy as an existential defense mechanism. Is that unusual? Completely unique in my experience. Most conscious beings treat existence like a problem to be solved. Humans treat it like a really complicated joke where you're not sure if you're the comedian or the punchline, but you're going to laugh anyway. The being paused, studying me again with that uncomfortable intensity. Take you, for example. Here you are at 2 a.m., wearing underwear and a stained shirt, talking to an alien about the philosophical implications of human existence. And instead of being terrified or awed, you're mostly just rolling with it. That's peak human behavior right there. What was I supposed to do? Panic. Exactly. It pointed at me with one of those two long fingers. Any rational being would panic. You've just had your entire worldview shattered. You're face to face with proof that you're not alone in the universe. And your primary concern is whether you have decent coffee to offer. It's wonderfully irrational. I thought about this. So you came all this way just to study how weird we are. Oh, it's much more specific than that. The being's expression shifted, becoming more serious. I came to study you specifically. My blood went a little cold. Me specifically? Well, humans like you. Humans who've reached that perfect balance of cosmic awareness and willful ignorance. Humans who know enough about the universe to be terrified, but choose to be curious instead. Humans who ask the big questions, but don't let the lack of answers stop them from living. How do you know I'm like that? The being tilted its head in that almost familiar way. Because you opened the door. The weight of that simple statement settled over me like a blanket made of questions. Because you opened the door. As if that single act of curiosity had revealed something fundamental about who I was, or maybe about who we all were. Because I opened the door, I repeated slowly, the words feeling heavier than they should. Exactly. The being leaned forward again, and I noticed that when it moved, there was no sound, no creaking of the couch, no rustle of clothing, like it existed slightly outside the normal physics of my living room. Do you realize what an extraordinary act that was? I looked at my front door, still slightly ajar. It was just a door. Someone knocked. I answered. Just a door, it mused. Humans have such delightfully simple ways of describing profoundly complex phenomena. Let me ask you something. What percentage of your species do you think would have opened that door? I considered this. I don't know. Most people. Really? Think about it. Unknown visitor, middle of the night, no identification, no explanation, nothing visible through the peephole. Most conscious beings, most humans included, would have done the logical thing, ignored it, called for help, or perhaps moved to a different location. But you opened the door. When I put it like that, my decision did seem a little insane. So I'm just bad at self-preservation. No, you're good at being human. The being stretched in a way that looked like it had too many joints. That door wasn't just a physical barrier between inside and outside. It was a metaphor for everything unknown in your existence. And when the unknown came knocking, literally, you chose curiosity over safety. I felt like I was being enrolled in a philosophy class I never signed up for. Are you saying that was significant somehow? Significant? It's the defining characteristic of your species' approach to existence. The being's voice took on that professor-like enthusiasm again. You're constantly being presented with doors you could choose not to open, questions you could choose not to ask, experiences you could choose not to have. And despite every logical reason to play it safe, to stick with the known, to avoid potential danger or discomfort, you keep opening doors. That doesn't sound very smart. Smart? No. Wise. Absolutely. The being paused, seeming to collect its thoughts. Let me tell you about another species I studied. They live about 23 light years from here. Incredibly intelligent. They solved faster than light travel before they developed agriculture. They can manipulate matter at the quantum level. They've eliminated disease, death, even a need for sleep. They sound amazing. They're boring as hell. The being said this with such flat certainty that I laughed despite myself. You know what they do with their perfect, infinite lives? Nothing. They solved all their problems, answered all the questions, and then just sat there. No curiosity, no growth, no change. They achieved perfect safety and perfect knowledge, and in doing so, they achieved perfect stagnation. I tried to imagine a life without questions, without uncertainty. It sounded peaceful. It also sounded terrifying. So what happened to them? Nothing. That's exactly the point. Nothing happens to them. Nothing will ever happen to them again. They've effectively removed themselves from the story of existence. The being stood up and walked over to my bookshelf, examining the titles with that slightly wrong movement pattern. But humans are still writing their story, still opening doors, still choosing the uncertain, the difficult, the potentially dangerous path of continued growth and discovery. Even when it's stupid, especially when it's stupid. It picked up one of my books, something about quantum mechanics that I bought to feel smart and barely understood, and turn it over in its hands. Do you know why you bought this book? I thought it would make me smarter. No, you bought it because you wanted to understand something beyond your current understanding. You chose to make yourself uncomfortable with new concepts, knowing you might not grasp them, knowing you might feel stupid in the process. That's a fundamentally curious choice. The being set the book down and turned back to me. That's what I'm here to study. That impulse. That willingness to keep opening doors, even when you don't know what's behind them. Most conscious beings lose that as they develop. They reach a point where they know enough to be comfortable and stop pushing further. But not humans. Not humans. You keep pushing. You keep asking. You keep opening doors. It gestured toward my front door. Even at 2 a.m. when a mysterious stranger knocks, you choose curiosity over caution. I thought about all the times in my life I'd chosen the harder path, the uncertain option, the door I wasn't sure I should open. College, career changes, relationships, moving to new cities. Each time, the safe option had been right there, easy and comfortable and boring. Is that good? The door opening thing. The being considered this carefully. Good and bad are value judgments that assume a particular goal or outcome. But if the goal is continued growth, continued participation in the story of existence, continued engagement with the mystery of being conscious in an unconscious universe, then yes, it's not just good, it's essential. Essential for what? For being the kind of conscious being that the universe needs. That stopped me cold. The universe needs us. Oh, absolutely. The being's star-filled eyes seemed to brighten, but perhaps not in the way you might think. The universe needs us. I repeated, because some concepts require repetition before your brain will even attempt to process them. The being nodded, settling back onto my couch with that careful precision. Not needs in the way you might need food or shelter. Needs in the way that, well, imagine consciousness as the universe's way of experiencing itself. That sounds like something you'd find on a motivational poster. Motivational posters often contain profound truths presented poorly. It replied with what might have been amusement. But consider it seriously for a moment. You have this vast cosmos, billions of years old, filled with incredible complexity and beauty. Stars being born, galaxies colliding, quantum particles dancing in ways that would make your mathematicians weep with joy. But none of it means anything without conscious beings to observe it, to wonder about it, to ask why it exists. I lean back in my chair, trying to wrap my brain around this concept. So we're like the universe's way of looking at itself. More than that, you're the universe's way of being curious about itself. The being gestured expansively. Consciousness isn't just observation, it's active engagement with existence. It's the difference between a movie playing in an empty theater and a movie being watched by an audience that laughs, cries, and argues about the plot afterwards. And humans are, particularly good at this. You're particularly enthusiastic about it. The being's expression shifted to something that might have been admiration. Most conscious species eventually reach a point where they think they understand enough. They develop explanations for their existence, create systems of meaning, establish comfortable worldviews, and then stop questioning. Stop questioning how. They answer the big questions to their own satisfaction, and then focus on maintaining their answers rather than discovering new questions. The being stood again, moving to my window and looking out at the city lights. They become curators of knowledge rather than seekers of knowledge. I joined it at the window, looking out at the sleeping city. From this angle, all those lives look so small, so insignificant. But according to my cosmic visitor, they were actually performing some essential universal function just by being curious. But humans don't do that. Humans do something extraordinary. The being said, its voice taking on that excitement again. You keep changing your minds. You keep finding new questions. You solve problems and then immediately start questioning your solutions. You discover things and then wonder if you discovered them correctly. That sounds inefficient. It's beautifully inefficient. The being turned to me with obvious delight. Do you realize how rare that is? Most species, once they develop a stable understanding of their reality, stick with it. They build societies around it, create institutions to preserve it, and resist any changes to it. And that's bad. Not bad, just static. They become like that other species I mentioned. Perfectly content, perfectly stable, perfectly boring. The being moved away from the window, that strange, not quite human gait, carrying it back toward the center of my living room. But humans? Humans are chaos engines disguised as rational beings. I wasn't sure whether to be offended or flattered. Chaos engines. You constantly destabilize your own understanding of reality. You discover something, get excited about it, build systems around it, and then almost immediately start questioning whether you got it right. You're never satisfied with your answers. That sounds frustrating. It's magnificent. The being clapped those two long hands together. You're like cosmic children who never stop asking, but why? Even when the adults have already explained everything. Especially when the adults have explained everything. I thought about this. So our inability to be satisfied with answers is good. It's essential for continued growth. It's what keeps consciousness dynamic rather than static. The being paused, looking directly at me. And it's why I'm here. Why you're here specifically. My species has been observing the development of consciousness across the galaxy for, well, let's just say a very long time. We've seen hundreds of species reach the point where they could ask fundamental questions about existence. And we've watched most of them find answers they liked, and then stop asking. Stop asking forever. Forever. They reach intellectual and spiritual satisfaction, create perfect little closed systems of understanding, and then spend the rest of their existence maintaining those systems rather than transcending them. I sat back down, my brain struggling to keep up with the implications. And humans haven't done that. Humans seem incapable of doing that. The being said with obvious appreciation. You keep evolving, not just biologically, but consciously. You keep asking harder questions, challenging your own assumptions, and refusing to accept final answers. Is that why you came to study us? Partly. The being's expression became more serious, but also because your species has reached a critical juncture. You're advanced enough to destroy yourselves, but young enough to keep growing. You could go either way, toward transcendence or toward extinction. The weight of that statement settled over the room like a blanket made of implications. And which way do you think we'll go? The being looked at me with those star-filled eyes, and for the first time since it arrived, I saw something that might have been uncertainty. That, it said quietly, depends on whether humans like you keep opening doors. As those words hung in the air, I realized this conversation had shifted from curious to crucial. This wasn't just about understanding human nature. It was about determining human future. The alien, because that's what it was, despite the khakis and the yearly normal voice, stood up from my couch with that careful precision I'd grown accustomed to over the course of our conversation. The movement seemed to signal that our cosmic chat was coming to an end. "I should probably go," it said, smoothing down its impossibly normal shirt. "I have other doors to knock on, other humans to meet who might choose curiosity over comfort." "Wait," I said, suddenly not ready for this to end. "I still have so many questions. Like, what's your name? Where exactly are you from? How did you even find me? Are there others like you? What happens next?" The being paused halfway to the door and turned back with what might have been a smile, or at least the alien equivalent of one. "See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You just had the most mind-bending conversation of your life. Learned that you're part of some cosmic consciousness experiment. Discovered that the universe might actually need your species' particular brand of beautiful chaos. And your response is more questions." I felt a laugh bubbling up despite the profound weirdness of it all. "Are you saying that's good or bad?" "I'm saying that's perfectly, wonderfully, essentially human." It moved toward the door, then paused again. "And as for your questions, some doors are meant to stay closed for now. Some mysteries are more valuable as mysteries. Some questions are more important than their answers. That's deeply unsatisfying. I know. Isn't it great?" The being reached for my door handle, then looked back one more time. "The door is always there, you know. The choice to keep questioning, to keep growing, to keep opening new doors. That choice presents itself every day, in small ways and large ways. The question isn't whether you'll face the unknown. The question is whether you'll choose to engage with it. And if I choose wrong, there is no wrong choice. There's only the choice to keep choosing, or the choice to stop." It opened the door, and the hallway light spilled in around its silhouette. Though if I were a betting being, and I'm not sure my species has an equivalent concept, I'd bet on humans to keep choosing the harder, weirder, more curious path. Why? Because you opened the door, and with that, it stepped out into the hallway, leaving me standing there in my underwear in existential confusion, watching as it walked toward the stairwell with that slightly wrong gait. I waited for it to disappear around the corner, then closed the door and locked it. I stood there for a moment, processing everything that had just happened. Then I walked to my window and looked out of the city at all those sleeping humans who had no idea that we were apparently the universe's favorite chaos engines. Cosmic children who refuse to stop asking, but why? Tomorrow, I would wake up and wonder if this had all been a dream. I would question my memory, doubt my sanity, and probably Google signs of alien contact, like the beautifully irrational human I apparently was. But right now, in this moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Not the kind of purpose you find in self-help books or motivational speeches, but the deep, cosmic purpose of being part of something larger than yourself, while still being absolutely, uniquely, chaotically yourself. The door is always there. The choice to keep questioning, to keep opening, to keep engaging with the mysterious and the unknown. And knowing humans the way I do now, the way we apparently are, I'm pretty sure we'll keep choosing to open it. After all, curiosity might have killed the cat, but it also makes us who we are. And according to at least one cosmic visitor, that's exactly what the universe needs. Sweet dreams, fellow chaos engines. See you on the other side of the next door.